Listen to this episode and many more on Spotify now. If you travel to Russia, you will find countless hiking trails across one of the largest countries in the world. But if you head down to the town of Yekaterinburg and head up one of the local trails, you will run into a shrine with 9 pictures on it. These 9 people lost their lives on this trail, so a tomb was built in their memory. But many people don't remember the exact names of the people who died. What caused this to become such an infamous story was the way they all died. Some blame mythic creatures, some blame the government, some blame the severe cold of the trail at the time that they went. Sadly, what went on that fateful hiking trip died with the 9 hikers. Hello everybody, my name is Juby Scott, and today we are looking at one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of all time, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this new episode of Juby After Dark. In 1959, a group was formed for a skiing competition across the northern Urals, Soviet Union. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, now the Ural Federal University, assembled a group of 9 others for this trip, most of whom were fellow students and peers at the university. The initial group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, but one member later returned due to health issues. Each member of the group was an experienced Grade 2 hiker with ski tour experience and would be receiving Grade 3 certification upon their return. At the time, Grade 3 certification would be the highest certification available in the Soviet Union and required candidates to traverse 190 miles. The route was designed by Dyatlov's group to reach the far northern regions of Oblast and the upper streams of the Lozva River. The goal of the expedition was to reach Otorten, a mountain. This route, estimated as Category 3, was undertaken in February, the most difficult time to traverse. On January 23, 1959, the Dyatlov Pass was issued their route book, which listed their course following the number 5 trail. At that time, the City Committee of Physical Culture and Sport listed approval. The Dyatlov group left the city. On the same day, they received the route book. Diaries and cameras found around their last campsite made it possible to track the group's route up to the day preceding the incident. On January 33rd, the group arrived at the edge of the highland area and began to prepare for climbing. In a wooded valley, they cached surplus food and equipment that would be used for the trip back. The next day, the hikers started to move through the pass. It seems they planned to get over the pass and make camp for the next night on the opposite side. But because of worsening weather conditions, snowstorms, and decreasing visibility, they lost their direction and deviated west, towards the top of the mountain. When they realized their mistake, the group decided to set up camp there on the slope of the mountain, rather than move 1 mile downhill to a forested area that would have offered some shelter from the weather. Yulin speculated Dyatlov probably did not want to lose the altitude they had gained, or he decided to practice camping on the mountain slope. Before leaving, Dyatlov had agreed he would send a telegram to the sports club as soon as the group returned to Vizhai. It was expected that this would happen no later than the 12th of February, but Dyatlov had told Yulin, before he departed from the group, that he expected it to be longer. When the 12th passed and no messages had been received, there was no immediate reaction, as delays of a few days were common with such expeditions. On the 20th of February, the travelers' relatives demanded a rescue operation, and the head of the institute sent the first rescue groups, consisting of volunteer students and teachers. Later, the army and police forces became involved, with planes and helicopters ordered to join the operation. On the 26th of February, the searchers found the group's abandoned and badly damaged tents. The campsite baffled the search party. Mikhail, the student who found the tent, said the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. Investigators said the tent had been cut open from inside. 9 sets of footprints, left by people wearing only socks or a single shoe, or even barefoot, could be followed, leading down the edge of a nearby wood. On the opposite side of the pass, 1 mile to the northeast, after 1,600 feet, these tracks were covered with snow. At the forest edge, under a large Siberian pine, the searchers found the visible remains of a small fire. They were the first 2 bodies, shoeless and dressed only in underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting that one of the skiers had climbed up to look for something, perhaps the camp. Between the pine and the camp, the searchers found 3 more corpses. Dyatlov was among them, who died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. They were found at the distances of 980, 1,570, and 2,070 feet from the tree. Finding the remaining 4 travelers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 4th in 13 feet of snow in a ravine 246 feet further into the woods from the pine tree. 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that some clothing of those who had died first had been removed for use by the others. Burned, torn trousers, and a left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. A legal inquest started immediately after the first 5 bodies were found. A medical examination found no injuries that might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had all died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to have been a fatal wound. An examination of the 4 bodies found in May shifted the narrative of the incident. 3 of the hikers had fatal injuries, 1 had major skull damage, and another had major chest fractures. According to one of the forensics teams, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high, comparable to that to a car crash. Notably, the body had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures, as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure. All 4 bodies were found at the bottom of the creek, in a running stream of water, had soft tissue damage to their head and face. For example, one was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, as well as facial tissue and a fragment of the skull bone, while another had his eyeballs missing. The forensic expert performing the post-mortem examination judged that these injuries happened post-mortem due to the location of the bodies in the stream. There was initial speculation that the indigenous Mansi people, reindeer herders local to the area, had attacked and murdered the group for encroaching upon their lands. Several Mansi were interrogated, but the investigation indicated that the nature of the deaths did not support this hypothesis. Only the hikers' footprints were visible, and they showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle. Although the temperature was very low, around -13 to 22 degrees Fahrenheit, with a storm blowing, the dead were only partially dressed. Some had only 1 shoe, while others wore only socks. Some were found wrapped in snips of rich clothing that seemed to have been cut from those that were already dead. At the time, the official conclusion was that the group members had died because of compelling natural force. The inquest officially ceased in May 1959, as a result of the absence of a guilty party. The files were sent to a secret archive. The diary from the hitchhikers became public domain in 2009, and the camera photos were donated to the daughter of one of the hikers. But the answer that they all died to hypothermia didn't sit well with most of the people who heard this story, and many believed more was going on than they were sharing. Here are some of the theories. In 2019, a Swedish Russian expedition was made to the site, and after investigations, they proposed that a violent katabatic wind was a plausible explanation for the incident. Katabatic winds are somewhat rare events and can be extremely violent. They were implicated in a 1978 case at Anaris Mountain in Sweden, where 8 hikers were killed and 1 was severely injured. The topography of these locations were noted to be very similar according to the expedition. A sudden katabatic wind would have made it impossible to remain in the tent, and the most rational course of action would have been for the hikers to cover the tent with snow and seek shelter behind the tree line. On top of the tent, there was also a flashlight left turned on, possibly left there intentionally so that the hikers could find their ways back to the tent once the wind subsided. The expedition proposed that the group of hikers constructed 2 bivouac shelters, one of which collapsed, leaving 4 of the hikers buried with the severe injuries observed. In one speculation, the campsite fell within the path of a Soviet parachute mine exercise. This theory alleged that the hikers, woken by loud explosions, fled the tent in a shoeless panic and found themselves unable to return for supply retrieval. After some members froze to death, attempting to endure the bombardment, others commandeered their clothing only to be fatally injured by the subsequent parachute mine concussions. There are indeed records of parachute mines being tested by the Soviet military in the area around the time the hikers were there. Parachute mines detonate while still in the air rather than upon striking the Earth's surface, and produce signature injuries similar to those experienced by the hikers. Heavy internal damage with relatively little external trauma. The theory coincides with reported sightings of glowing orange orbs floating or falling in the sky, within the general vicinity of the hikers and allegedly photographed by them. Potentially military aircraft or descending parachute mines. This theory, among others, uses scavenging animals to explain the hikers' injuries. Some speculate that the bodies were unnaturally manipulated on the basis of characteristic livor mortis markings discovered during an autopsy, as well as burns to hair and skin. Photographs of the tents allegedly showed that it was erected incorrectly, something that experienced hikers were unlikely to have done. A similar theory alleges the testing of radiological weapons and is based partly on the discovery of radioactivity on some of the clothing as well as the descriptions of the bodies by relatives as having orange skin and gray hair. However, radioactive dispersal would have affected all, not just some, of the hikers and equipment. And the skin and hair discoloration can be explained by a natural process of mummification after 3 months of exposure to the cold and wind. The initial suppression by Soviet authorities of files describing the group's disappearances is sometimes mentioned as evidence of a cover-up, but the concealment of information about the domestic incidences were standard procedure in the USSR, and thus far from peculiar, and by the late 1980s, all Dyatlov files have been released in some manner. International Science Times posted that the hiker's death was caused by hypothermia, which can induce a behavior known as paradoxical undressing, in which hypothermic subjects remove their clothes in response to perceived feelings of burning warmth. It is undisputed that 6 of the 9 hikers died of hypothermia. However, others in the group appear to have acquired additional clothing from those who had already died, which suggests that they were in a sound enough mind to try to add layers. In February 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation into the incident. Although only 3 possible explanations were being considered, an avalanche, a slab avalanche, or a hurricane, the possibility of a crime has been discounted. In the end, the Soviet government was quick to get an answer out to the public no matter how much disregard with it. On July 1st, 2016, a memorial plaque was inaugurated in Urals Perm region, where the 9 pictures of those who mysteriously lost their lives live on to this day. Thank you guys so much for listening to this Juby After Dark. If you'd like to check out all my other episodes, don't forget to hit that follow/subscribe button, depending on where you are hearing this from. If you are on Spotify, these podcast episodes are all on my YouTube as well. And if you are on YouTube, there is a link in the description to take you to the podcast show as well, where you can listen to the podcast exclusive episode, The My Lai Massacre. If you would like to support this show, then please follow me on my Patreon. For just $1 a month, you can help keep this show going. Thank you all so much for watching this, and I will see you all on the next Juby After Dark.